What's up? Welcome to another installment of Classic Album Ranking Reviews. I'm Pistol Pete. With me, as always, is my associate Kai. And we got a good one for you tonight. Def Leppard, Hysteria.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a great one. This album still gets played very much today. Was the intention behind it was to make the hard rock version of Thriller. That was Mutling's vision for this album.
Album of singles.
That's right. It's an album of singles. Well, out of 12 songs, 7 of them were singles, respectively. However, in the 80s, that was very common.
Back in I think one of the reasons why that maybe was more common in the 80s is that people were still dealing in the limitations of, they're thinking of it as a cassette or a vinyl, which meant they were really thinking in terms of 8, 9 song albums. And when you've only got 8 or 9 songs, you're thinking, well, then they all have to be pretty damn good. If you've got 13, 14 songs on an album, one, you're trying to fill space. But two, that gives you more leeway to feel like, well, if most of these are good, then that's fine. But if you got 8 songs, you can't fuck around, man. You gotta make them all count. All killer, no filler. And
that's right. Wham's Make It Big only had 8 songs.
Yeah, man, and all 8 of them.
Singles, yeah.
That's right.
Dude.
That's right. So, the number of albums from the '80s that you can rattle off and say, really, every song off of this deserves to be heard. I think of something like Tears for Fears, songs from the Big Chair.
Oh yeah, Madonna.
Madonna.
Yeah, True Blue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every song off those albums.
And Like a Virgin,
That's
too.
right.
Yeah, Like a Virgin, her self-titled, and if we're talking about these albums, Paula Abdul, Forever Your Girl. Dude,
absolutely.
that was a monster hit. That was, in fact, I would as far as popularity status and sales, I would say it's right up there with this.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Paula Abdul's "Forever Your Girl." It charted for close to 2 years.
Okay.
Just like Hysteria.
The only distinction I'll make is that, Hysteria is in that very short list of records that have sold. Is it 10 million? It's like Diamond or Double Diamond or something. There's very, very few albums that are on that list.
It's well, at this point it is multi-platinum. It is the 51st best-selling album in the U.S. and it spent 96 weeks on the charts, respectively, tied with Bruce Springsteen's "Born in the USA."
Okay, here's a piece of trivia I want to ask you. I'm gonna move this for you.
Okay.
Here's a piece of trivia I want to ask you because I know another rock album that was on the charts for a bonkers long time was Metallica's Black Album. That's what I'm curious about. Do you know which album was on the charts longer? I don't know the answer, so your guess is as good as mine. The Black Album or Hysteria?
I don't know which one was on there longer, but I would certainly guess Hysteria. That would be just a guess. I don't know that for sure, but yeah, that would be my best guess because it dropped more singles, and also you got to consider too that this was an album that was written to be a commercial success. That was Mutt Lange's vision for the album, even though he almost didn't produce it.
Isn't that wild? Because the story goes he was just exhausted, right? It's not that he didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
He was just, he told the band, I'm just too tired.
Yeah, I'm just too tired. I need a break. And understandably so. So they tried producing it themselves. They recruited Jim Steinman, who wrote Meatloaf's "Bad Outta Hell" album.
Right.
But it was just but it didn't work due to creative differences.
Have you heard any of the demos that they did with Jim?
No.
So it's really interesting to hear what the songs were like at that stage, because if you hear, so the one that I've heard is a demo of "Animal," right? And the band says this in the clip where they're showing you the original demo of it. They tell you It's obviously the same song. I mean, you listen to it, and it's obviously what you were going to hear later on the album, but it just doesn't have anything special about it. It just, it sounds like Pyromania Part 2, which is kind of crazy to say because when Pyromania came out, that was like the height of pristine pop rock production, right?
It was truly groundbreaking.
It's truly groundbreaking to get a rock record that sounded that good. So for them to come off the heels of that and say, the band has famously said, we could have made a sequel to Pyromania in like 2 weeks. It wouldn't have taken us any time at all. But they said we just didn't want to settle for that. We wanted something that would really blow people away, that would push the limits of what recording and producing technology was at the time. Which is certainly what we got. Because Pyromania, as good as it sounded at the time, it really sounds like a product of the early 80s. I mean, it really sounds kind of dated.
Oh, absolutely.
But
not in a bad way.
Not a bad way.
Not a bad way whatsoever.
But what I mean, the difference is that the difference in the sonic quality between Pyromania and Hysteria, you put Hysteria on today, it could have been produced now. I mean, it sounds that good. Everything sounds that pristine. It has this shimmering quality that, for me, for my money, Pyromania still sounds a lot like a 70s record, a 70s rock record.
Really?
A really great 70s rock record. But it just doesn't have that, like, huge, crystalline, shimmering sound that Hysteria does. Of course, part of the reason for that is just when the technology was farther. But a lot of it even comes down to the drum sound. And Pyromania is earlier in the 80s. Hysteria is later in the 80s. By that point, you had that evolved, huge gated snare sound. But it was also because by that point, like, as I'm sure you'll talk about, the history with Rick Allen, by that point he was using his electronic kit, and it just had a different sound. Because it was electronic.
Simmons, he had the Simmons style drums.
That's right.
Yeah,
and
those are in the '80s. That was a big thing. Matter of fact, I remember as a kid, I'd like see videos, dudes playing those, and I was just like, yeah, that sounds good.
It's pretty cool.
I like that.
But because it was electronic, it was way more consistent. You didn't have a lot of the because it wasn't an acoustic set, because it's basically digital. You can get a lot more consistency out of the sound. So, for me, that's why this album is such a leap forward from Pyromania. Production quality, even songwriting quality. The Pyromania is a classic for a reason, but I would submit, if the pop rock thing is what you're going for, if the charts are what you're aiming at, that, of course, this album is an even bigger deal.
They nailed it. They nailed it, and like I said, that was the intention. That was
right.
Mutt Lange's vision. That's exactly what he wanted to do, and he wanted to make the hard rock equivalent to Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Interesting.
Yeah, where every song could be a potential hit, and respectively was. I mean, obviously, not every song was released as a single. In fact, I feel that many of the deep cuts are better than the singles, which we'll soon discuss.
Sure.
But yeah, every song had the potential to be a hit, and very well could have. And it took him altogether about 3 years to write and release this album. Yeah, the writing process was slow, and also upon its release, it wasn't a hit. It wasn't an immediate hit. Like, it took some time for the album to climb up the charts.
Right.
Yeah, it was I believe the first U.S. single, believe it or not, was "Winning." And however, the first single I heard from it was "Animal."
Sure.
And which was my introduction to this band. It turns out I heard Photograph and Rock of Ages, a few years prior to that, but I didn't know that it was Def Leppard. It wasn't until this was released in Animal, I'm like, okay, that's Def Leppard. I saw the video. I thought it was all right. This is before, I liked hard rock, but I wasn't a full fan yet. I was still very much exploring musically. At that point, my musical background was mostly pop.
Right.
However, I was already a Pink Floyd fan. Yeah, in third grade, I heard Pink Floyd The Wall for the first time, and I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't get enough of it. My dad had the tape, and I just kept playing it over and over and over again.
Right.
But that
Right.
was you know, Pink Floyd, a little bit of a few other rock bands, the Beatles, the Stones, the Doors, some bands that my dad would play.
Were you
And
into Van Halen yet?
yeah, I was into Van Halen. You know, of course, you know, Jump and Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams. That was in Panama, of course. I still have 1984 on vinyl. That's an album that we're gonna do eventually.
Okay.
But remember, Jump. It was very poppy, very keyboard. You know, lots of keyboards.
Oh yeah.
Which really upset many, you know, loyal Van Halen fans. But that was and Jump was their only number one song,
Right.
but it had keyboards. But dude, you can't. That riff is infectious. There's
Well, you talk about fans being upset with the band for a change in sound. I do admit that if you look into the history of Def Leppard, a lot of people who were there for right up until Pyromania, who liked that the band wrote songs with hooks, with catchy choruses, but they really liked that at that point, when Pyromania was coming out, they still sounded like an all-out rock band. They still had this rawness to them.
that's right.
And I know a lot of fans, when this record came around, they did not like that they leaned so much more into the pop direction.
That is very true. And they were there was I was reading about that, and they mentioned that. Yeah, it alienated a lot of loyal fans. And but sadly, for better or worse, that's what happens to many bands when they blow up. They become a little watered down, perhaps a little too polished,
A little bit.
a little bit. But in this case, it was very well done. I have no complaints. I bought this album. I was well, like I said, my first introduction was Animal. That was in the fall of '87 upon its release.
So you hear Animal, and what do you think of it?
I thought it was okay.
Interesting.
I thought it was. I didn't. You know. I didn't think it was. You know, the shit or great. But I didn't dislike it either. I thought it was cool. Made me bob my head. You know, along to it. But I didn't really think it was anything special.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
But once the title track Hysteria dropped, I thought I'm like, okay, I like this. Even though I'm not big on ballads and slow jams,
Sure.
that was very well done.
Mm.
I mean the layers, that guitar had kind of a funky sound to it. I
Yeah.
thought, very much so. And I'm like, okay. Now I'm like, okay, this is Def Leppard. Hysteria. I remember seeing the video. Of course, you know they list the artist, you know, song, album title, and the record label. I'm like, okay, so this is the title track. Cool. But it wasn't until that was in the spring of '88 when Hysteria dropped. Thought it was a great song. You know, very well done ballad. In fact, if I'd like to make a list of, you know, my top 10, you know, hard rock ballads, and that would definitely be high on the list.
Mm-hmm.
It was very well done. But it wasn't until later that year I went to, and that summer I took my first trip to Poland, and I saw the video for Love Bites. But
Yeah.
I was a little taken aback just by the style of the song. I mean, here I am. It sounded, you know, at that point I looked at Def Leppard as a hard rock band,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
But then I hear Love Bites, and
Right.
it had a very poppy feel to it. You know, got the hand claps. That, you know, were you know very big in the '80s, a huge staple.
Oh yeah.
And I was just listening to it. I'm like, this is cool, but is this a Def Leppard? I'm like, this is not the Def Leppard that
Oh,
you know
man.
that I'm used to hearing. But nonetheless, it was a great song, right?
It's a great song. It really, you hear Love Bites, and then you know that Mutt Lange went on to be this huge country producer, and it all makes sense because
Well,
Love Bites is borderline a country
well,
song.
okay. Now, do you personally? I don't hear any country to that whatsoever.
Is that right?
No, I really don't. Like I said, to me, it had more of a pop and even a soul appeal. With the lyrics, but definitely not country. So I tried. I saw that classic albums episode on Access TV about it, and they were talking
It's a
about
great
that.
episode.
Oh, very good. It's awesome. But I couldn't. I tried to hear it as a country song, and it just wasn't happening for
Fair
me.
enough. Fair enough.
So, but yeah, to me, it's definitely a pop, and even as pop and even soul appeal.
Sure.
But a great fucking song, and that was the only. Though the album produced several top 10 singles, that was the only number one. But then when I came back from Poland,
Right.
it was all over the radio, including "Pour Some Sugar on Me,"
See,
and that was it. Once that was released, the album just hit the stratosphere.
it's crazy to think about that, right? About the relationship between number one singles and album sales, because, and that we're talking about a period of time when people bought music, right? Nowadays, we'd have to have a totally different conversation about this.
Oh God, yeah.
But back then, it's just funny to think about an album that it had that many singles, only one of them hit number one, and yet it is one of the greatest selling albums of all time. And there are certainly other albums that had more number one singles off of them that didn't sell a fraction of the number of copies that this did.
True.
So it's interesting to think about that. I mean, I guess you you're this bottomless well of musical knowledge. Can you think of an album from the same time period that had more number one singles but didn't sell this many copies?
Mm. I really, I mean, I can't, I can't think of as far as record sales, but there were, like I said, there were other albums that had, maybe not number one hits, but they had several singles, like "Forever Your Girl." That was
Sure.
out of 10 songs, only two were not released as singles.
Incredible.
Two, but I believe "Straight Up" and "Forever Your Girl" hit the top of the charts, the title track.
Yeah.
But it had several other singles. I mean, "Opposites Attract," "Knocked Out," "The Way That You Love Me." That was the first single, and it didn't do as well. That was another album. It was just like this. It started upon its release. It started off slow, but then just slowly began to climb the charts. "The Way That You Love Me," first song on the album, as well as the first single. Remember hearing it on the radio, but it wasn't a big hit. It wasn't until "Straight Up" was released that the album started to climb the charts.
What a great song.
And then the title track was released, "Forever Your Girl," and then "Knocked Out," "Opposites Attract." Um, what else was there? "I Need You," "Cold Hearted." Yeah, those were, I believe those were all top 10 hits.
Fun fact, do you know that Paula Abdul is one of the earliest examples of pitch correction in the studio?
I do not.
Yeah, apparently. Now, I'm not trying to throw any shade at Paula Abdul. God bless that
I
woman
love Paula.
and the music she brought us,
I
right?
love Paula.
Amazing songwriter, singer, dancer, everything. But I know from the production background that she's one of the earliest, at least most famous early examples of them doing stuff in the studio to pitch correct her, where she'd be sharp or flat, and they would do stuff in the studio to fix it after she had recorded the vocal.
I could see that. Yeah. Thinking back and listening to that album, I could think of parts and songs where that took place.
Maybe so. It's not like they do it today, where it's all like on a computer and they literally just like move the note with a mouse and a
Yeah,
Back then
then
they
you go
had
see them live and they sound like shit,
right.
right? Yeah.
Back then they literally just had to, as far as I understand it, they had to just speed up the vocal or slow it down to make it sharper or flatter. It's very very interesting.
Okay. I'll have to see that sometime. But without further ado, let's get to the list. Okay. So
How many tracks on this album?
12.
12.
Yeah,
All right.
12 songs. So my number 12 was the closing track of the album, Love and Affection.
Get out of here.
Not.
Get out of here. See, this is why I didn't make my own list because
I
we're going to argue about all of them.
I know, and the video would be really long, right? But not that it's a bad song, but I just thought that they were trying to make another Hysteria. I mean, it has.
Which they did.
It has the same
tempo. Which is why it
tempo,
deserves to be higher on the list.
But you can only do that once per album and have success. You can't do that twice.
Get out of here, Pete.
No,
Get out of here.
Seriously.
There's a door.
Even in the 80s. Even in the 80s, you couldn't do that.
I will admit, they do both occupy the same space. Same songwriting style, everything. And if I have to choose between the two of them, I'm obviously going to choose Hysteria. Oh man, I would never put this song at the bottom of the list.
Well, I didn't want to put it at the bottom of the list. Like, this is like the last album we did, Appetite for Destruction. This is one of those albums I can listen to straight through without skipping a single track. Though I skip a lot of the popular ones that I don't really want to hear again. But other than that, I can listen to it all the way through. And I put that at the bottom because I had to put one at the bottom. So.
Fair enough.
But the reason why it's like I said, I felt like they were trying to make another Hysteria, and you can only successfully do that once per album. And the fact that Hysteria was track number 10, so the third of the last, they were in such a close proximity, to one another that I didn't think it worked. I don't want to go so far as to calling it filler. Because in early 1989, I remember hearing it on KB. It was either KBPI or KAZY. I heard him play it one time, but that was it. So, not because it's a bad song, but it just
sure.
You can only with that particular formula, you can only have success one time.
Okay.
So that's my number 12. Number 11 would be Excitable. That's the track 11. Right before that, next to the last. And that was, I heard that song on the radio a good couple times maybe, on Y108 and KS104. It was briefly released as a single, but didn't do very well.
Interesting.
This is also early 1989 when the popularity of the album was slowly beginning to wane. I mean, well, you got to figure, throughout 1988, it was one of the top-selling albums.
Well, you think about how many albums it sold, and you start to think, how many years you say it was on the charts?
It was released in August of 1987, and it was on the charts up through until about April of 89. March, okay. April, yeah, that's when I heard Excitable.
You sell that many copies, you sort of have to ask yourself, who's left? Who doesn't already own this album?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, I remember I bought the cassette tape. I bought it at Southwest Plaza Mall here locally. We had 3 music stores at the time. We had 2 Music Lands, one upstairs and one downstairs. And then right below the upstairs Music Land, there was a store called Disc Jockey. And that's where I bought the tape. It was on
2 Music Lands.
Yeah, 2 Music
Lands.
In the
same damn mall?
Yes. I think one of them later became a Sam Goody,
yeah.
Which is Police and Gangsta and 8 Ball and all that shit, right? So, man. And that's one of the oldest CDs that I own. So.
Very cool.
And I know I already made a video for that, but I want to do another one. I want to do it right.
Okay.
Because and like I said, that book you just got me recently about the rise of gangster rap. I was reading about it, and it just took me back. So I'm like, okay, we got to do that again. But back to
number 11 was Excitable.
Yeah, number 11 was Excitable. That's right. Number 10 would be Run Riot.
Okay.
A deep cut. Great song. Very good. typical 80s, 80s hard rock song. Always put me in the good mood. Remember listening to it on my Walkman on the bus during class and just had it on full blast, jamming out to it. Awesome fucking song. I mean, like I said, it was a deep cut. Some hardcore fans might even consider it to be filler, but I disagree. I don't
I
think
disagree as well.
I disagree. I don't think there's a single song on this album that would I can't talk. That would be considered filler status. Yeah, when you edit it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I'd probably put Run Riot higher on the list than you, but I agree that it's a good song and nothing really on this is filler.
No,
Like you say, you're gonna have to put something at the bottom of the list.
that's right.
And even if you are completely wrong with your number 12, I think you're probably right that this is probably number 10.
Okay, so that works. Number 9 would be, and this is gonna piss a lot of people off, and probably you too.
Oh,
But I'm sure you could guess. It's the most popular song on the album. Pour Some Sugar on Me. And the only reason, not because I dislike it, not because it's worse or better than any of the songs, but because it's just played out.
okay.
Dude, I mean, how many
It's true.
times am I going to hear it when I turn on the fucking radio?
You know, I can say both things. On the one hand, it's really not the song that I'm like dying to hear, because for the same reason and it's not because I don't love it. It's because I've heard it so many times. It's in my soul. I don't ever need to hear the song again to tell you every microscopic detail about it, right? And yet I recognize why it's such a big hit. Why it is the song that caused this album to break through. Why the song took over strip clubs. Why
And still, and
I'm
it's
sure it still does.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's still a strip club staple to this day.
Yeah, it everything you need a song to have to really hit, that song has. And it's funny, I think they talk about this on the classic albums episode you mentioned, that this was the last song they
Yes,
recorded for the
I was
album.
about to say yes. This was the last song that they made.
And if I remember the story right, Joe says that they were all on break, like everybody was out like smoking or shooting basketball or whatever, and that he was just sitting in the studio with Mutt, and Joe was sitting there with a guitar, and he was playing what is basically the riff, and that Mutt was like, "What is that?" And Joe was like, "It's just something I'm screwing around with," and he was like, "No, that's the best song I've heard in 10 years."
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And Mutt was apparently so excited about it that Joe was like, "You want us to?" I don't think the rest of the band's gonna want to do this, man. Like, we've been in here for 3 years busting our balls. We're finally done, and you want one more song? I definitely don't think the record company's gonna be down for this. And he's like, yeah, but this is the song. This is gonna be the best song off the album. And I guess so. I get it is the song. I mean, as good as everything else on the album is, and even though you personally would put it at number 9, I think you might have to admit, without this song, I don't know that the album ever does what it does.
It certainly would not. Yeah, this is the song that put the album on the map.
Yeah.
And even I don't know if you remember the music video. It had live segments. Well, you know where that was filmed? Right here in Denver.
Denver, right?
Yeah, at the old McNichols Sports Arena. Yeah, that used to be prior to 1999, where the current Mile High Stadium is. There was McNichols Arena, and then right next to it was the old Mile High Stadium.
Interesting.
And my very first concert, Roger Waters, in 1987 was at McNichols Sports Arena.
Cool, man.
Yeah. So the video for Pour Some Sugar as well as Armageddon It were both filmed here in Denver, which I think is really fun.
That's really cool.
That's really cool.
All right. All right.
But yeah, but this, even though I ranked it at number 9 due to the fact that I've heard it so many times, this is the song that put the album on the map. Without it, it would not be what it is.
Yeah.
But it's, in my opinion, it's nowhere near the best song on the album.
Okay.
So, moving along. After that, I don't know. I put Women next. That would be number 8. This was the first U.S. single.
Yeah. Now, even I have to admit.
Animal was actually the first official single on this album, released everywhere except for the U.S. and Canada.
U.S. was Women.
Yes.
Okay.
And it hit number 7 on the rock charts, respectively, but only made it to number 80 on the Billboard Hot 100. So,
Look, man, even
not
I have to
well.
admit, I mean, I love this song.
Me too.
It's one of my favorite cuts off the album, and even I have to admit, this is not the single. This is just not it.
No, it's not the opening single. I mean, I know it's the opening track off the album, and I think it's a good opening track. I mean, from there on, it just gets better. It builds, and it has that very quintessential, that 80s synth bass, that.
Yeah.
That's, you hear that, and for that, it sounds dated. Not in a bad. Okay, a lot of times, when you hear the word dated, you think of it in possibly a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But not in this case. Not in the 80s. The synth bass was very big in many styles of 80s music, be it pop, rock,
Yeah.
hip hop, whatever. And it sounded fucking great, man. Every song that had it, I think I liked it that much more as a result. I mean, you know me. I'm all about bass.
Yeah, man.
And drums and reverb, all that. So I heard that, and it definitely has that.
Yeah, it's great.
But it should not have been released as the first U.S. single. I think Animal would have. Well, then Animal was released, and it did okay.
That's the thing, is that part of it's just the context, right? You know, I mean, things happen the way they happen, and who knows if you shifted things around, what it would have done. If you take somebody who their first exposure to Def Leppard was Sugar, and they've fallen in love with the band because of that, and then you let them listen to Animal, they have different feelings about it. It just seems like it's sort of like if they had re-released those singles after Sugar, they probably would have done some business, because it just changes things for people.
Right.
I mean, I remember I was watching Mike the Snare's deep discog dive of Maroon 5, a band for whom I have many mixed feelings. And he was talking about how, I believe it's their third album. They released the third album. It doesn't do very much business at all. And they were a big band at the time.
Which singles were on?
Well, that's what I'm going to get to.
Okay.
Is that the third album really doesn't do a lot of business. After that, the band says, fuck this shit. We need a hit. We need a hit. We need something to remind the world that we're fucking awesome. And that's when they released Moves Like Jagger. Which,
Good one.
look, yeah, many people are divided over whether or not the song has any substance or depth. But everyone has to admit, the song, it hits. Right? And it certainly hit the top of the charts. So then they went back and they re-released their third album with Moves Like Jagger tacked onto it, and that finally got the album to start selling. So, and it caused people to listen to the album differently because it had that song on it and people liked that song so much. So that would be my curiosity, the time travel experiment I would want to see what would happen is, if they put Sugar out first, how would it have affected the other singles? Is it even possible that on the heels of a song like Sugar, where everybody loves the band, could they have released Women and it did better? Probably still not a number one single, never destined to be that. I say that, you know what? I can think of a lot of bands that had like a huge hit song, and then they release other singles from the album, and it just doesn't do anything. Whether it's Hanson and Umbop, whether it's Natalie Imbruglia and her cover of that song "Torn." You know, "Torn," you couldn't get away from that song. It was so big.
It was a good song.
It's great. It's a great song. You ever heard the original version?
Mm, I don't think I have.
We'll have to listen to it when we're done with this.
Okay.
It's one of those things where it's like obviously the same song, totally different genre. It doesn't sound anything like a pop song. She released other singles from that album, and I personally love the album. But did any of the other singles on the heels of the song that took over the world do anywhere near that amount of business? No, not even close. So I don't know. What's next?
All right. Next, number 7 is, as we were just talking about, Animal.
Yeah.
Animal. This was, as I said earlier, my introduction, my official introduction to this band. As far as, me knowing who they are. Remember, I saw the video on MTV. Thought it was cool. I liked it. But I didn't think it was great.
Okay.
Like I said, made me, bob my head along to it. I'd listen to it anytime. It wasn't in heavy rotation on MTV, but they played it regularly while it stayed on the charts. And I believe this reached, and this is outside the U.S. and Canada. This was the first single from the album. Here in the U.S., it reached number 5 on the rock charts and number 19 on Billboard. So pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Not bad. Not bad at all.
Man, I love the song.
But it doesn't. But it's not. It doesn't do the album justice.
Interesting.
It does not do the album justice. It could have been. There's better songs which we'll get to.
I personally think that they have better choruses, but I think it's the best verse they've ever written.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that everything about the verse, especially the vocal, is the best verse they've ever done. That it sets you up for the pre-chorus and the chorus. It's one of these songs that the rest of the band has talked about how one of the things that Mutt Lange would do with them when they were writing songs is they would come to him with a song, especially with a vocal melody, and that they would get to the chorus and he would say, "That's your pre-chorus. You need to write something even better for the chorus." And it makes sense because every song on this album, the verse is great. And you use the pre-chorus and you're like, how is it going to get better than this? And then when the chorus lands, it's even better.
It is. Dude. Yeah, just like just the layers in these songs. It's amazing fucking songwriting.
I'll tell you. And the production style, this is one of those bands where even they have said one of the reasons they had to make Hysteria sound so much better than Pyromania is they said, well, by 1987, everybody sounded like us.
True. This is true.
If we'd released just Pyromania Part 2, we would have sounded derivative, which is kind of dumb because we came up with that sound, but it is what it is.
But could you imagine how this album would sounded had it not been produced by Mutt Lange?
Man, I mean,
dude, it wouldn't be. I don't know. I think they'd be lucky if they released 2 singles off of it.
Okay, we'll take a small detour right now because here's what that makes me want to ask. Is there anyone else you can think of who, of course, the album would have been different, but is there anybody else that you can think of that you would say, if they couldn't have gotten Mutt Lange, they should have gotten this person?
Bob Rock.
Was Bob Rock really at the top of his game at that point? I don't know
Oh yeah.
What was he doing at that time? What he produced?
He produced Rat.
Oh, you're right.
He produced Rat. I believe he produced Poison as well. And most notably, he produced Metallica's Black Album.
Sure, but I mean, that's 4 years later, so I wasn't sure what he was doing in 87.
Yeah, he produced Rat.
Did he produce, am I imagining this, an AC/DC record?
Not that I know of, but he very well could have. He could have made Who Made Who.
Maybe so. Okay, so Bob
But
Rock.
yeah, but if it wasn't, yeah, if not Mutt Lang, I think Bob Rock would have worked, but it still wouldn't be what it is.
Okay, I mean the other person that I think of because you mentioned this was meant to be the pop rock version of Thriller.
Right.
In an alternate universe, what do you think happens if they tap Quincy Jones?
For this,
Yeah.
oh man, well, I think you'd have a lot more songs that sound like Love Bites.
Oh, you might be right about that. Some more number one singles, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I'm glad it turned out the way it did. Okay, what's next?
Next is Don't Shoot
What
Shotgun.
number are we at?
We're at 6. Don't
Number
Shoot
6.
Shotgun.
Okay.
Another great 80s hard rock song. Always put me in the good mood. Came on right after Gods of War. Just did well as far as preserving the continuity of the album. It was a song I always enjoyed turning up. Sounded great on my Walkman. Fucking loved it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, number 6. Deep Cut, song that, only the people who bought the album, are familiar with. But still, I think number 6 is a good spot
It's a
for it.
great place for it.
Okay, moving on, number 5, Armageddon It.
Man.
This is another song where the video was shot at the old McNichols Sports Arena. This one made it to number 3. This album produced 4 top 10 hits, and that's one of them. This one was number 3.
I'll tell you, man, this is a song that Joe Elliott famously described the band's music as deeply meaningless because they did a great concert for VH1 in the late 90s, Storytellers concert. And I remember this girl gets up and she asks for the story behind Armageddon It. And Joe is like, I mean, look, there's not a deep story behind the song. It's us making a joke. Because, like, with our Sheffield accents, we're just saying, are you getting it? Because I'm a getting it. And he's like, that is as deep as the song gets.
Yeah, but Steve Clark's guitar solo was awesome.
It's a great song, man.
Come on,
It's a great
Steve,
song.
Get it.
It's just one of those moments where you're like, wow, I'm digging way deeper than this song was ever meant to go. I'm asking myself, what deep thing is this song about? And it's just not.
It's just not. But it doesn't always have to be so deep.
It doesn't, and one of the things that I'm still huge fan of the band. I love their Slaying album in the mid '90s. I love Euphoria. I love X. I love songs from the Sparkle Lounge. I've listened to all of it, man. I like all of their music, and the one thing I'll tell you that their more recent stuff has really slipped away from that. I think if they were to be so bold as to ask me, like, how do we recapture the magic of the legendary years of when we were at the top? One of the things I would tell them is that, well, these days your lyrics make way too much sense. You're singing about real shit, and it's very straightforward. And one of the things you're missing is that back in the days of Hysteria, literally one of the things that they would do with Mutt Lang, the way that they wrote the lyrics to Sugar, is that while the song was playing, Joe and Mutt were on opposite sides of the room shouting at each other, just nonsense, to the vocal melody. And then they would go to each other and say, "This is what I think you were saying." And the very first thing that Mutt thought Joe had shouted at him was, "Love is like a bomb." And he was like, "That's fucking awesome." And most of the lyrics, there's a couple of actually deep songs off the album, right? But for the most part, you listen to the lyrics and you're like, I don't know what this is about. These words are kind of like nonsense, Mad Libs gibberish, but they just flow. It's more about how they sound rolling off the tongue than it is that they make sense. And I do think that's one of the things that's missing from the band these days, is that they're way too concerned with does it make any sense instead of does it sound good coming out of the mouth. So
Yeah, but even Joe Elliott, during that classic albums episode, he was talking about how what's better, lyrics or a melody, and he said definitely a melody.
absolutely,
But from what you were just saying, it sound like they're doing the exact opposite of that with their new music.
they're really focused on the lyrics and they're really focused on the melodies are just less surprising these days, and it does seem like I mean don't get me wrong, the worst Def Leppard song off of their brand new album this year, Kick. Every rock band should be so lucky to write a song that good. I agree with that. And yet, when you're talking about the band that wrote this album, you just expect more. You expect a band that's learned the secret mystic sorcery of songwriting for this kind of album. And for me, it feels like the longer they've been around, the deeper that they will dig into this well of mystery of how to create music like that. So for their more recent stuff to just kind of stray away from this, it's like surprising and disappointing to me. Although, if the band should ever hear me saying this, I want to emphasize I still love them. I still think they're great. I still think that the worst song they've written in the last 15 years, every band should be so lucky to write a song that good.
Oh man, that's a pretty bold statement.
I, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
I'm gonna stick to it. What's next?
Next is number 4, Love Bites, the one and only number 1 song off the album.
See, that's so interesting because I love the song.
But it's very why. But you know why it's number 1, right? Because it's poppy.
It's real poppy. It's a ballad. It's
Yeah.
for me. I would put this would be much lower on the list for me,
Okay.
even though I have nothing but love for the song.
But really, this was. I don't know what it was about this song. Well, I heard it in Poland, right? This
Yeah.
was in the summer of '88. It was a few weeks before I came back to America, and I thought it was cool, but it wasn't what I expected to hear
Right.
from Def Leppard. That's why I thought it was so cool. I'm like, all right. And then I come back to America, and it's number 1 song. I'm hearing it, on the radio constantly, along with "Pour Some Sugar on Me," and it just. I don't know. I just thought it was really cool. I liked the style. I like the hand claps. I don't I don't hear any country in it whatsoever.
Okay.
But then again, I'm not a big country fan, so I'm sure if I listen to more country, I might hear it. But I didn't hear any country in that. And Mutt Lang at the time, he was already thinking about going country and producing more country artists. And
I wonder if there's been a country cover of this song. I'm sure there has been.
there very well may have been.
I'll have to listen after this.
All right. So that's my number 4, Love Bites.
Okay.
Number 3, the title, the.
I love more than the others. So I enjoy Love and Affection a lot more than Love Bites. Although I have to admit, I'm kind of with Joe Elliott on this song, is that one of the reasons that maybe I don't like it so much is that it's very difficult to sing this song. It's very difficult as a guy. I mean, he's talked about that this song almost killed him, that he almost couldn't sing it in the studio. And that,
Okay, yeah, I could see that.
and that's really not a function of the chorus, it's the verse. The verse is very high. It's very difficult to sing as a guy. To sing it that way, with that level of like tenderness at the top of your range.
Yeah, it's got a soul appeal to it.
Yeah, so that's probably part of the reason is that it's just easier to sing Love and Affection. It's easier for me to get into the song versus Love Bites, but man, it is tough. It's no surprise to me at all that whenever they perform that song live, which they do, it is keyed way the hell down just to make it easier on everybody. So, I don't know.
Okay.
So that is, what'd you say your number?
3.
Number 3.
Number 3.
Fair enough.
Number 2, Rocket.
Yeah!
Rocket! Dude, man. This was this is the official final single from the album, released in, I believe it was January of '89. Made it to number 15 on the charts. However, I was very disappointed in the video version. Did you ever see the video?
I haven't seen the video. I have heard the single edit, and it's just...
And it's I imagine it's the same version that's on the video, and it's one of those songs that, it clocks in just over 6 minutes.
Right.
You have to listen to the LP version. If you listen to the single version or video version, it doesn't do it justice. They chop the second verse as well as the breakdown. I mean, I know they want to edit it for time and whatnot, but there's some songs where you just can't fucking do that, and this is one of them. Yeah, they chop the second verse and then the breakdown especially. Not only that, but it's just totally different than the LP version, and it's just, I'm like, no. In fact, every time that video would come on right afterwards, I would shut the TV out. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this song right now. And of course, I end up listening to the whole album, right? But that's, I love the layers. I love that drum break. That's fucking awesome. And then just the guitars. And I also like the fact, I mean, I didn't understand this till I got a little bit older, but I like the fact that, it pays homage to a lot of the bands that they grew up listening to. Queen, David Bowie, Elton John, the Beatles, Thin Lizzy. Just like when you listen to the lyrics, that's what they're doing. They're doing, yeah.
So many references.
Yeah. Killer Queen, Major Tom, just Rocket Man. Yeah, those are all references, to the old artists. And I thought that was really cool. Especially once I understood what it meant.
Sure.
And I remember even watching it with my dad, when the video for it was like, he was totally digging it because he understood the lyrics. I didn't understand why. The point is like, yeah, it's like, okay, they're talking about old bands, old rock bands. I'm like, okay, which I didn't know at the time, but now I totally get it. And of course, with it also samples, it replays the chorus for Gods of War backwards at the beginning, and also some sampling of Love Bites during the breakdown. That's all, courtesy of Mutt Lange's production, which was very well done. But I thought it was, I put it at number 2 because it's one of the songs that it wasn't, even though it was a single, it didn't get played out. And I think that's one of the reasons why I liked it so much, because I didn't hear it. And also, to really get the full effect, I'd have to listen, to the LP version.
Sure.
So that was number 2. And number 1 is the best, is a deep cut, of course, but Gods of War.
Yeah.
Dude, I love that fucking song. It is the first song off of side 2. Everything about it, the layers, the intro, the breakdown, the echo from the reverb, even the samples of, speeches from Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher were all very well used. And just, it had a very, had a dark appeal, just a dark aspect to it, which I'm very much drawn to.
Yeah, man, just listening to the song in my head at this moment gives me chills. It's so good.
And of course it has that 80s, quintessential synth bass that we mentioned earlier. And then I just love the end of it too, how, the tone changes, whenever they sample all the speeches. Just, dude, that was the one song that I would say I listened to the most. I kept rewinding it, and it was easy to rewind. It was the first song on side 2, so I'd listen to it. But one time was never enough. It was always 2 or 3 times. I'd rewind it, say, it's like, I gotta hear this again. And then it's like, okay, one more time. But then it ended, I'm like, no, One more time.
Yeah, man.
It was the one song that I just kept playing over and over and over again. And to this day, even this morning while I was, listening to it, and making this list, I kept replaying side B. So from
This
this
song is
song.
even longer than Rocket, right?
Yes, it is. It is long. It's slightly longer. Clocks in. Rocket is like an even 6 minutes. This is like 6.5 minutes. So couldn't. Man, well, it's not. I don't think it has single potential to begin with. But even if they did try to make it as a single, they'd have to chop the hell out of it like they did with Rocket, and it would just sound like shit.
It's the kind of song that if they had released it as a single, it would be a sign from the band, we're not trying to be a pop band. We're not trying for a number one. If it happens, that'd be great. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would almost signal that they were more of like a prog rock band or like making a concept album or something that it would be much more in the vein of like Peter Gabriel and Genesis
Yeah.
than it would
Yes.
be
Yeah.
and Yes and
Yeah.
well all big artists and bands, right? But not exactly trying to capture the mainstream. Those are bands that like when they hit it big, they were just as surprised as anybody else.
Right. But this is a commercial album. That's what they were trying to go for, and releasing this as a single would have been the
Yeah.
exact opposite of
Was the
that.
kind of song that it's almost like a gift to the fans, to the people who that are going to listen to the whole album and who are looking for those hidden gems as deep cuts. It's a gift because if all you've heard are the singles and you're like, yeah, but I want to listen to the album, and then you listen to it and you get to track 6, right?
No, this is 7.
7.
Yeah.
You get to track 7 and you're like, oh my god, this is one of the greatest albums of all time.
Yeah.
Like, listen to all these catchy songs until this moment, and you get a song that is this good. It really has depth to it. So, to me, it's always been a sign of like the band was always at a fork in the road where they could have chosen to be a pop band, or they could have said, we're not really concerned with the charts anymore. We're going to make deep music. It always could have happened. It arguably did happen in the middle of the 90s when they made Slang,
Right.
which to me is probably. Is it my favorite Def Leppard? Do I like it more than Hysteria? That's too strong. That's too strong. But it's certainly my second favorite. Certainly my second favorite. That it 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 is the album where it feels like the band was like, you know what? Let's write some music that means something. We'd still like to sell records, absolutely, but let's write some music that is really mature.
Yeah. Because they've matured. They got a little older, and
Yeah.
yeah, when you're they were all in their mid to late 20s when they wrote Hysteria, so they were still very young. They
Yeah.
were just in a different place in life. But once you get a little bit older, like at that point, they're in their what, say in their 30s. Yeah, you have much more life experience. You want to talk about some of those experience and real stuff rather than just pour some sugar on me,
Right.
which is obviously about sex, as were many 80s songs, but it's written in such a good way that it's subtle. I appreciate subtlety.
I agree.
Yeah, a lot of people don't, and you hear a lot of today's music, and it's just too overt.
I know, man. Cause
I
some
mean,
of them,
I'm not offensive in any way. I mean, remember, I grew up on
right,
NWA, Two Live Crew, and Too Short, and I
right.
listened to as well as Eddie Murphy, Andrew Dice Clay, and Richard Pryor. So offensive is the last thing that I'm gonna find it, but I appreciate subtlety, and
Which is
with
just
Pour
to
Some Sugar on Me, you get that.
you take a song like, if you complain about the lack of subtlety, so they do a song like I don't know, WAP. And
That's
somebody
exactly what
and
was
somebody will
going
say
for.
like, yeah, but all those songs back in the '80s were sexual as fuck, right? In the '80s you had Pour Some Sugar on Me. In the '70s you had A Whole Lot of Love, right?
Yeah, talk dirty to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just yeah, but you have to admit there's a level of subtlety to pour some sugar on me that just doesn't exist in WAP. And I'm not throwing any shade on WAP. I think it's a genius song, but subtle it is not.
Not in the least.
There's no way to listen to that song and not know what they're talking about. Whereas Sugar, you play Sugar for an 8-year-old and they're not going to pick up on it,
No.
So.
And many songs in the '80s were like that. I mean, I'd listen to it as a kid and I thought nothing of it, but then I'd listen to it as an adult and I'm like, oh,
Right.
I'm like,
Exactly.
oh, so that's what this song's about. Okay.
No, I get it.
So yeah, but it's still a great song.
Well, okay, so we've just ranked Hysteria. The last thing I want to close with is I want to ask you, given that we both have such strong positive memories and feelings about this album, and even listening to it as recently as today, man, it's still so good.
It is.
How do you feel about the follow-up, Adrenalize? Which is arguably them trying to one-up Hysteria. It's them trying to be even more pop rock.
I just think it was released at the wrong time.
You think if it was released in the 80s, it would have... Of course it would have done better, but I just mean your feelings about it.
Yeah, if it was released in, let's say, 1989 or even 1990, it would have fared a lot better than it did. Because by 1992, it was all about grunge at that point. I mean, yeah, you still had some hair metal bands making music, but at that point, a lot of people, they were just over that. They were tired of it. A lot of it was considered cheese at that point.
When you listen to the record, even today, if you listen to Adrenalize, does it strike you as cheesy in a way that Hysteria is not?
Only because of the time in which it was released. You gotta remember, 1992. I was in 8th grade at the time. I started high school in the fall, so I was very much in tune with the current musical landscape of the time, and I was honestly a little surprised when they released that album in 1992. I'm like, okay, I remember I'd hear "Let's Get Rocked" while I'd hear that song roller skating, and it just sounded so out of place with everything else that was going on at the time. Of course, with me, I was all about the gangster rap at the time. I was listening to NWA's "Ends for Life" dropped at the time. I was listening to that as well as Ice Cube's "Death Certificate." The Ghetto Boys, "We Can't Be Stopped." That was primarily what I listened to at the time. But you also have to consider, this was, bands like Nirvana,
right,
and Pearl Jam. They were on the rise. This was, "Smells Like Teen Spirit" and "Come As You Are" were, in heavy rotation on the radio, as well as Even Flow, Pearl Jam, and then shortly after that you'd have Jeremy. And I also remember hearing Hunger Strike. Temple of Dog. Yeah, Temple of the Dog. That's right. So, really, the musical landscape at the time was just rapidly changing, and Adrenalize just did not. It just sounded so out of place. And I'd say the same thing about Vince Neil released a song that year called "You're Invited But Your Friend Can't Come." Awesome fucking song. Still, even at the time I heard it, it's still, it was very fast, very up-tempo, put me in a great mood, and still does. It just, I put it on this day, I turn it up, and it still gives me a rush. And it was featured in the movie Encino Man. With
sure.
Brendan Fraser and Pauly Shore,
right,
and Sean Austin, right? It was... remember seeing it at the theater that summer. It was a good movie, very entertaining.
Cool.
And that's where "You're Invited But Your Friend Can't Come" was on that soundtrack.
Interesting.
But even that, as great as I thought it was totally out of place with everything that was going on at the time. And I would even say that as at that time, anything that was associated with the 80s, be it, hair metal or, the R&B, New Jack Swing style, it was all very 80s. Like I remember in 1990, are you familiar with the artist Pebbles?
No.
Yeah, she wrote that song Girlfriend.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah, Girlfriend. That was a top 5 hit in 1988, and that was part of the New Jack Swing genre, respectively produced by L.A. Reid and Babyface. However, in 1990, she dropped another hit called "Giving You the Benefit," which charted really well. It was on road. It was the video was in not heavy rotation, but in regular rotation on MTV. But I remember thinking, this is just so out of place with what's going on right now. And this is 1990.
I guess I'm just saying that even outside of that time period, now it's today. We're a long way out of that, so I can listen to it, divorced from feeling the pressure of whatever the trends are right now.
Yeah.
Just listen to it for what it is. And if I listen to Adrenalize, the production is flawless. Everything sounds perfect on the album. It's just pristine in a way that I think is even more pristine than Hysteria. But the songs are just not as good. I would never try to argue with somebody that Love Bites is not a cheesy song, but it's so strong. It just has so much heart to it, and it's so catchy that I'm glad to forgive it the cheese or even enjoy it. But you compare that to the big ballad off of Adrenalize.
What, have you ever needed someone so bad?
You ever needed someone so bad?
Yeah.
Now look, I'm not even saying that that's not a good song. But Love Bites, it ain't. It's not Love Bites. It's not Hysteria. It's not Love and Affection. It's got a cheese factor.
It's very formulaic.
It feels like a formulaic song.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It follows the 80s hard rock formula. First you release a hard up tempo song, and then after that you release the power ballad. And that's what that was. But in 1992, people were just sick of that shit, including me.
Sure.
I was just like, this is
right. You try to imagine,
It's I mean, and even at the time, I remember thinking, it's like, dude, the 80s are over. Dude, I love the 80s. That is my favorite decade. If I could go back in time and live one decade over and over, that would be it. But in the early 90s, I'm like, it's like, dude, the 80s are over. Okay, it's time to move on.
Fair enough.
But the reason I said that is because music coming out at the time was awesome. It was great. It was fresh. It was great in its own right. Wasn't any better or worse than what came out in the 80s, but it was different. And that's where my head was, especially when it came to hip hop.
Yeah, and the thing that makes it harder for me to understand is that, well, I want to have a level of love and compassion for what all these bands were going through, because I'm acting like it's so easy after a decade of doing music like this. Then the trend starts to change, and the way that most people, the public feels about it, the way the charts feel about it starts to change, and you're trying to, because if you just chase what's popular right now, then people won't like you either.
That's what Poison tried to do
with
a Native Tongue. Even though it wasn't a bad album, but it was hard to take, at the time, it was hard to take a band like that seriously, who was trying to chase the current trends. And you know who else did that? Was Bon Jovi. They released Keep the Faith.
Right.
They even, cut their hair.
Right.
They were not only going for the sound, but going for the look. In fact, I remember the same day I was at Funplex roller skating, and I heard Let's Get Rocked. I also heard Keep the Faith, and I just remember shaking my head. I'm like, no.
Right, this is not it.
No, this is not it.
So when I think of a band that in the early 90s did successfully reinvent themselves, and the role model for how a band back then could have done it, and yet I'm thinking of U2 with Octung Baby. You know, one of the most successful reinventions a band has ever accomplished. And yet, what was everyone else supposed to do? You know, U2 was a band that had always had depth. So for them to swing for Octung Baby is like, it's a stylistic change, but it's not a substance change.
Not
You
at
know,
all.
but for Poison to try to make a serious album, it's like, no, fuck you guys. This is don't even pretend.
Yeah, and that's what they did. And I believe C.C. DeVille was no longer part of the band at the time, and they were also looking at what's different. And I think even in the mid '90s, Motley Crue, they wrote an album.
They wrote, is that Generation Swine?
Yeah, that's
And
that's
with that different singer, right? And you know what? Look, man, I know that I'm gonna get shit on for saying this. Maybe this is because I'm not a huge Crew fan. I'm really not a huge Vince Neil in particular fan. I mean, much love to the guy. Just his voice is not for me. His singing style is not for me. His lyrics are not for me. The music he wants to make is not for me. And when the Crew got together with, I wish I could remember the new guy's name. I think it's something Corbet.
I forget.
But I much prefer his voice to Vince Neil, and that's my favorite Crew album. I am the one person on planet Earth that feels that way.
Probably.
But of course it is because it's the least Crew sounding thing they've ever done. So, you know what? What do I know?
Dude, for me, my favorite Motley Crue album is "Shout at the Devil."
You know what? If you like the classic Crew sound, then I see why that is.
That came out another album that came out the year you were born, man.
Now listen, the one reason that I know that Generation Swine is my favorite Crew album is because I did the due diligence. I listened to their entire discography.
Oh,
So
dude,
I can
okay.
say that Shadow the Devil is a damn fine album if you like that kind of music. It just doesn't do it for me.
Wish I did. I'm all about it. So
And that's even dumb for me to say because there are a ton of other 80s bands, other 80s rock bands that anybody would say belongs to the same genre that I do like. There's just something about, I think it really just comes down to Vince Neil and I don't respond to his voice. I think it's probably like,
I understand.
if they had a different singer, I'd probably be more into the band. But you know what? That would be a heavy price for the band to pay because I'm apparently the only person that doesn't connect with them. As soon as Vince Neil left the band, they stopped selling records. And as soon as he came back, they started selling records again. So clearly, I'm fucking wrong.
Yeah, like what's different?
Right.
There you go.
Right. That's right. Well, anything else you want to say about this record to close it out?
No, I think that's it. Next on the list will be Dr. Dre's The Chronic.
Yeah.
The landmark album. It's what put G-Funk on the map and set the trends for just about every '90s rap album that followed. So probably do that here in a few weeks. So hope to see you back. Hope to see you back again for The Chronic. Thanks for tuning in.
Peace.
Peace.